Well, it's a big hello. Welcome
Hello,
to the
again.
Untold Radio Network.
Down South Anomalies.
Down South Anomalies. And tonight it is part 2 of Beyond Sasquatch,
yes.
Paranormal Activity. And we are joined by one of the most credentialed individuals in the whole research field, the one and only Christopher Noel. Now, Christopher is
Can I just say?
Yeah. Of course you can.
Acknowledgement
yes,
to
please.
the traditional owners of this nation, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we acknowledge the
elders,
the
past,
elders.
present, and emerging.
It's always with the elders.
Yes,
and I have such a reverence for them.
The other thing we need to say is we are on stolen land, and we acknowledge
that's
that.
What we're acknowledging.
Now, I can hear a little bit of bubbling underneath in our soundscape, but I think we shall survive that.
Yeah, we will.
You know, it's the fact we're in the Southern Hemisphere. We're joined by the extraordinary Christopher Noel. Christopher Noel is a Yale, I was going to say, is a Yale Master in Philosophy. He has taught for 20 years at the Vermont College, Fine Arts.
Fine Art.
He is a lecturer, author, field researcher. He's an incredible documentarian. And most of all, he is one of the most decent human beings we've ever come across, one of the most generous, loving, and extraordinary individuals on this godforsaken planet. Thank you, Chris, for joining us on Down South Anomalies.
I don't know if I can live up to that, but I'll try.
Now, you have given us many, many books over the years. Maybe go through a few of these books, and all of these books are still available, I take it, on Amazon, Chris?
Yes.
Yes, novels and non-fiction works. So let's just move through them quickly.
We're moving,
People need to go and look. If you're unaware, how many books have you actually published now?
I guess it would be about 9 or 10. It depends. Some of them... Some of them contain parts of earlier books, but improved upon. So it's a little bit hard to say. Doesn't matter. 9 or 10.
Showed that.
No, I'm talking about this.
Oh, yes. And now
let's go to one of the
one.
most remarkable books that I think Chris set out to do a departure from his research into the parallel hominid.
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, you get struck with a piece of 4B2 as you hit the final chapter.
You do.
And realize that all this material we're dealing with seems to have and consistently some very extraordinary parallels. This book is up there with Leslie Kean's Surviving Death, and it's a really important book that will bring extraordinary comfort to people have experienced something out of the ordinary, or are just searching for some meaning in terms of our own mortality. So, Chris, what led you to write this extraordinary book, There Is No Veil? And did you believe at the beginning that you were going to depart from your parallel hominid research?
Well, I've always kind of had this book in the back of my mind because when I was 17 years old, I had a long conversation with a ghost. I and a friend of mine, an older friend of mine,
she was your creative writing teacher, wasn't she?
She was my creative writing teacher. She was 14 years older than I, and she had ghost activities in her house. And so I said, being an adventurous young lad, I said, well, let's try to contact it. And so we
with a Ouija board,
we acquired a Ouija board, and we started out, and right away it worked. It worked a treat. It worked very well, like a charm, and the planchette sped around the board in circles and landed on letters. And we quickly realized we had to use a tape recorder so we could say the letters because we couldn't stop and write them all down. And we compiled a whole blank book full of questions and answers back then. And it was several months in duration, this conversation. And it sort of colored and enriched and deepened my sense of reality, that there's a larger reality frame out there around our mundane frame. And I always thought that I would pursue that, but nothing else of a spiritual nature happened to me for the next 44 years. And so I thought, well, I better stop waiting and just try to dive into this from a research angle, from an intellectual inquiry angle, and include the earlier very, very concrete experience, but then, take a deep dive into the history of the spiritualism movement and all sorts of scientific, very rigorous, impeccably credentialed scientific women and men who sought to demonstrate incontrovertibly the reality of spirit. And so I read a lot
of people, excuse me, Chris, wouldn't be aware of like the experiments actually conducted at places like Stanford that were peer reviewed, that actually stand the test of time and do show that there is a reality to this phenomenon. And just if I can digress back to that first chapter of There Is No Veil, that is an extraordinary page turner. To actually listen to that. That was not something I suspected whatsoever. And I believe your creative writing teacher was not interested in this subject matter at all. She was just troubled by the amount of activities she had in her home.
She was quite interested as well. We were both fascinated by it. And that's why we participated so kind of avidly and consistently in this conversation. I'm glad it was a page turner. It certainly was a page turner in as a lived experience, at the time. And so it gave me a sense, just to boil it down, there was this man who manifested himself as like a little ball of light that would come down, and my friend's name was Catherine, and her husband would see this ball of light come down while she was sleeping and just hover over her head now and again. And also, she and her husband would see a pillar of light in the corner, and they wouldn't see any definition to it. But then when they weren't looking at it, they would form the same picture in their mind of a sad-looking older man sort of stooped over with overalls on. I don't know if that's an Australian term. Yeah, and so they had this sense of him, and apparently that's whom we were able to contact. And he said that every time we tried to get to his backstory about why he has to stay kind of chained, tethered to the earth like this, he would usually get garbled. The letters would get garbled, but we managed to extract from him this sort of backstory about how he had killed his daughter and buried her out in the back property.
Right.
And he wanted us somehow to help him to atone for this, so that he could be freed from this remorse, this terrible, heavy remorse that was keeping him on earth, and it would release him from this somehow. And we would ask him, well, how do you want us to do that? And he would say various things. He said, you need to go dig. He said, dig dead kid for me. Oh. Or he would say, you need to go gather your harvest of bones. And we would say, well, what do we have to lose if we go and dig this kid up? And one time he said, only everything. No, only all. Oh. And we said, well, can you blame us for not wanting to take your directive on this? And he also said, well, he called her Kate. Her name was Catherine, but he called her Kate. So Kate and Chris must love each other and bear her again. Her was his daughter.
Oh, wow.
So, but we didn't like each other like that, and we weren't going to bear the kid again. But he kept hammering away at that month after month. But we would get him off the subject, off that topic, and sort of like quiz him on other aspects of what it's like to be a ghost, and it was just fascinating. And so I was able to put it all in the book, and we could dwell on that longer if you want to, or we could.
Well, what? One of the oddest things about reading that is it actually conjured up a remarkable film that's quite recent, maybe 5-6 years old.
Ghost Story.
A Ghost Story by David Avery. Have you seen that film? It utilizes the conceit of the ghost underneath the white sheet.
I don't think I've seen that. Good.
It's an amazing
film. You need
to
see that film. And in many ways, I'm kicking myself I don't have the trailer up to play people. Mm. But there were numerous things in that film that actually, when you step back from that conceit and follow the narrative, which deals with a couple who are in a relationship that's having its problems, but the man is actually killed in a car accident and then comes back to the house and finds that he is able to hover in that house, but extremely difficult to actually break through to the woman he loves and make her aware that he is still there. And there are some extraordinary melancholy moments where that ghost looks out the window to a property across the road, of which another ghost appears
in the window
and asks, who are you waiting for?
No, yeah, what are you doing? He says, what are you doing? And he says, there's subtitles. It says, I'm waiting for someone. He says, who are you waiting for? And he goes, I don't know.
I've forgotten.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
It's so deeply, it's so filled with pathos, these
oh my God.
But it made me realize that the director, the writer himself, must have had some experience and done some extraordinary research.
Yeah.
Because the one thing that film does, that you have written in your book, is it goes into the notion of time. And how, in terms of like when you read that first chapter of yours, that you're looking at something that happened well over 100 years ago, and yet the emotional remnants of it are still in the environment. And there are moments with really protracted scenes that drag on, and there are moments where time speeds up to an unbelievable level. And there's also one moment where finally this woman is liberated, leaves the house, but unfortunately the spirit is still there. In moves a South American single mother with her children, and out of sheer frustration, unseen by the family, he starts picking up objects and throwing them around the room like a poltergeist.
Yeah.
So a ghost story. I think it's David Avery. Yeah. I'm not sure. You'll have to check that.
Was it 2017?
I think it's 2017.
Really
an important film.
Yeah.
And right at the start of that, the ghost gets up from the hospital bed, leaves the body, and there is a white light wall.
Straight ahead.
Looks at the wall and then walks away from the light.
Doesn't go straight to the light.
You would think everybody would just go to the light, but there are people who have either they're just weighed down, freighted down by their own emotional chains, or they have unfinished business, or they're filled with rage at somebody or at the situation, and then they step into. I mean, apparently there's no time at all once you transcend up to the more rarefied levels, but you're in a mixed environment when it's partly the earth vibrations and partly the transcendent vibrations, and so there's you're neither here nor there. You're betwixt and between, and it's just so profoundly hopeless unless you can get someone to help you, or unless you can accomplish what you're seeking to accomplish. So I mean, I just hope that none of us, or none of those of you listening has to be stuck in that situation. But
maybe we'll be more enlightened.
I'm sure we will, given what we've been through and how much we've figured out about this whole crazy life of ours. But no, I'm kidding. Probably we will have trouble. Everybody has a certain amount of trouble, unless they're saints or something. But a lot of in the book, I was able also to include reports from people who not just near-death experiences, but who are dead, and they talk through reputable, extremely believable mediums, and they explain what it's like over there, and they say uniformly, they say that in the first phase, they're so feeling such empathy for those that they love that they try to communicate with them, and they say it's like everybody's ignoring us. Why can't I talk to you? And that's exactly what happens in the movie, apparently. And everybody seems to say that. And then they gradually, then they have helpers and guides, and they get the advice that you can stay around and try to establish some connection. Because the whole point of my book and my thinking, and I could be wrong, but I think that there's no veil in the sense of an objective barrier that's there no matter what. It's a state of mind. And if you can clear yourself to recognize and to embrace the fact that we're all actually occupying the same space, just at different levels of vibration of reality, different frames within. It's like a breath within a breath within a breath. That you can make contact. There is no necessary or fundamental or the veil or the barrier is a mirage that can be overcome or transcended if you just have the right mindset and the right insight into the nature of it.
So how did you come to this conclusion, like from dealing with the Sasquatch?
Well, the Sasquatch is a vaulting way ahead in this story, but I'll tell you an interesting little anecdote is I was working on the book this past summer, and I had made some progress in researching and sort of constructing it, and I didn't have a title yet. So and this is in the introduction, so or the preface, but I went into a local store and I was shopping for something, and I thought, there is no veil. Maybe that's the title. So then I bought my products and I went out to the car, and right before I pulled back out onto the street, I heard 5 loud and distinct raps on the back passenger side window. It sounded just like somebody was hitting the glass with a quarter or whatever coin you have.
Yeah. No, we got,
Click, 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 click. Very loud, very unmistakable. And I looked back, there's nobody there. And so I took that as an endorsement of the authenticity or that I was on the right track with that concept, that there is no intrinsic veil. And so that's that little story.
And I think, it's important, as we've been finding as we're doing this podcast, and the deeper you go into this research at moments in your life, that you've got to stick to your intuition. Your intuition brings you things that you could never imagine. And it's hard in our reductive thinking that we try and find an explanation for that. There is no explanation. Just take those hints and be very aware in the moment. It's a very Taoist notion. It's a very Buddhist notion to actually be aware of the moment, be thankful for what you've got, and be hyper aware, because sometimes it's the most subtle things that can be an indicator that there is a bigger, broader expanse to reality than we perceive.
For sure.
Well, that certainly is true. Just the other night, maybe 2 weeks ago, actually, my mother, I live with my 85-year-old mother, and we were trying to figure out a way that she could get my attention in the middle of the night if she had some distress or some physical thing happen to her. And I brought a bell. In fact, this bell.
Beautiful.
Nice.
Into her bedroom. I said, what if you ring this? I'm just down the hall in another bedroom. I said, what if you ring this? And so we tested it. I went down the hall and closed the door, and she rang it, and it was too far away. It wouldn't wake me up out of a sound sleep. So that was that conversation. The next morning, I'm down in the kitchen and I'm making breakfast, and I open one of the kitchen drawers, and I hear that bell sound in the drawer.
Wow.
And so I think, well, I'm supposed to do something with that bell. So I have it hanging up on a little push pin up here. And I've been practicing trying to telekinesis to make it move.
Right.
And I have a Ouija board right here on the desk underneath me. And even though normally you need 2 people to do a Ouija board, I have heard that you can do it with 1 person. And so I'm trying to expand into that larger reality frame here in this little room. And I feel as though, although it's hard to tell, I can make the bell move so far just a little bit. And I asked the bell, if you will. I said, was that you ringing in the drawer that morning? And it wobbled a little bit.
Wow.
So that's kind of where I'm at right now with my own practice. I'm going to write a sequel to the book someday. And so I'm gathering information for that.
And the truth is, these things aren't far-fetched at all. They have actually existed under controlled conditions, peer-reviewed conditions.
The Philip experiment.
And they've been proven to be true. And the Squirrel Experiment. One thing we were discussing with Carter, who we were hoping to have on together with you, but we had our, three-dimensional reality time dilation.
Time dilation happened.
Yeah. We will do that.
But we were discussing with Carter, in the beginning of ufology there, it was all about the angle, elevation, what size it was, what you saw in the sky, and you never wandered back home with the witnesses. But if you did, you would have found that there was a whole parallel sense of phenomena occurring in their lives. They were maybe having poltergeist activity. Maybe the clocks had all stopped at the time of that sighting. Maybe they were hearing disembodied voices. And recently, Whitley Strieber did a documentary that we watched here on the Travel Channel after his extraordinary wife that had been so supportive of his experiences has passed away. And one thing it brought up that I actually didn't see in the literature yet was there was, maybe these individuals they were seeing were entities. I dare ever use the word aliens or extraterrestrials. I want to pull back from any form of hypothesis, but they're also witnessing dead relatives as well. And in the 1980s, we actually went to a lecture by Dr. Kenneth Ring, who had done a massive study on near-death experiences and then published a book on the parallels between abduction experiences and the near-death experience. Yeah. Now, I can understand people with a vested interest that have maybe spent their life and maybe generations of their family had being out in the deep woods as a hunter, seeing Sasquatch as entirely flesh and blood, and that's a perceptual thing, and that is fair enough. But we cannot afford to discount the large number of reports that actually take in all this peripheral, what we term paranormal phenomena. And, from a synchronistic perspective, here's the oddest thing. I picked up the back of your book and I went into a conniption and an absolute shock when I read, it shows how the supernatural is natural and the paranormal is normal. Because Asperser and I thought, hey, we've hit on something here. We've hit on a catchphrase. And then 2 weeks later, your book arrives and we realize, no, we didn't hit on that at all.
Oh, you said the same thing?
Yeah.
Maybe we both at the same time went into the source field and pulled that out.
Maybe we were reading. Yeah.
Maybe we were connected
somehow. So, this is an extraordinary work. Maybe we should go back.
I think we should look at the trailer at the moment.
Yeah, is that a good thing to do at this stage?
Well, I could first talk about some of the preliminary. Well, I'm afraid of what I would say would be redundant because I say some of the same things in the trailer. So maybe we should play it.
Oh, that's okay. Look,
no. Give us a preliminary.
Sometimes it takes a few times before it actually sinks into people.
And can you just check your mic?
You know what I mean?
Your mic lead there. We had a little bit of sound problem before, but you're coming through fine now.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
No, good. All right, let's do this preliminary.
Well, so in my research and then in the book, I went through all sorts of the landscape of the last 100 years or so of psychical research, where scientists and experiencers and psychically gifted folks would be able to communicate with specific evidential information that has no other explanation besides the fact that there is this accessible superstructure of information that, for instance, remote viewing, if you're an adept at remote viewing, you can sit here and somebody can say, an address in China. They don't even have to say, that the small amount of a cue that remote viewers can use to actually succeed in their target, in their mission, is just breathtaking. People can even say, they can say, well, Shanghai on the Fifth Wharf. I don't know if Shanghai is a port city or not, but the Fifth Wharf.
It is now.
And then exactly. And the remote viewer can can go and say, well, there's a herring fisherman by the post that has the flag, and then you can call someone up in Shanghai and they can go to the Fifth Wharf. They can say, well, this isn't a port city, and then they'll say, well, it's on the lake, and then they go and they look and they take a picture, and it turns out it's the same exact thing. There's this informational superstructure that just pervades our entire reality and speaks to the larger, vast, and probably infinite reality frame that transcends our little frame here. And remote viewers can tap into it. People with precognition can tap into the future because it also contains the future. And they can take a piece of marble, and they can read that marble back into the past, and they can feel as though they're actually at the monument in ancient Greece where this piece of marble came from, and they can describe what's going on. And then historians can read that and say, yes, that would be accurate for what's going on there. In other words, all of time and space is accessible and available to our consciousness, and to those who know how to tap into it, they can tap into it. And to the rest of us, we could probably learn, but it might take longer than we have, because it's different. Some people, just like for some people, they can see dead people and there's no veil, and for you and me, there is a veil, but it's not it's not an objective veil. So anyway, so the more I realized the expansiveness and the precision of consciousness like this, the more I was reminded of things that Sasquatch do and that people report Sasquatch doing, like reading their minds, like warning them about things that are going to happen that they need to be careful about, like disappearing right in front of their eyes. I have a trusted friend in Texas who was driving along the road with a friend of hers in the passenger seat, and a Sasquatch in broad daylight walked in front of her. And people describe this by the hundreds, but this is my only trusted, credible friend who's told me this. And the Sasquatch walked in front of them and vanished into thin air. And not only that, but her passenger corroborated it. And it wasn't as though the Sasquatch zapped their brains and they lost time and then they came to and it was gone. Everything was continuous. The driving experience was continuous. It wasn't a break. And so it was that the only interpretation is that Sasquatch body disappeared. And so for years and years, I'm thinking, well, how could it be that Sasquatch, that this flesh and blood, meat and bones could actually vanish? How could that possibly be? Well, maybe they're bending light around them. And that's what I proposed in another book. I said it must be a trick of, they must have electromagnetic capabilities that can bend light so that they seem to disappear. They appear to disappear, so to speak. But then the more I went into learning about spirits and how they manifest themselves and how they seem to be in the same space and time with us, and then they can, but they're not dense enough to be perceived. And then they can sometimes, in the right circumstances, with the right intent, they can densify themselves. They can thicken enough so that we in this vibration can suddenly see them, or they're partly visible, transparent, but they're just thick enough, just dense enough for us to be able to see. And then I thought, well, why perhaps that's the same thing that Sasquatch does, and maybe instead of disappearing, they're appearing from a state of invisibility because they've passed on. And maybe it is just as Sasquatch seem to be more adept at mind speak or telepathy than most of us are. Perhaps they're much more adept at manifesting once they're in that other state, in that other condition after their physical death, and then they can manifest back when they wish to. And perhaps they're better at it, more proficient at it than we are. And that when they manifest, they look like they're flesh and blood. But if they need to exit, like if there's a car coming, they can exit back into their natural, their currently natural state of vibration.
I think, that's in many ways, that's very consistent with the notion of the etheric body. And when I trained as a nurse, I met an extraordinary woman, excuse me.
Choking there, love.
Who went on to become a profound midwife, and she's passed away, Beryl Sheather. She was a country girl, and she was not a complicated person, but emotionally, she was one of the most profound people I've ever met. Very generous and very considerate. And she was having astral projection experiences that she was completely unaware of.
She didn't know what it was.
And privately, she asked me one night, she goes, have you ever experienced holding on to the end of your bed so you won't fly out the window? And I go, what do you mean by that? Anyway, she goes, I'm learning to be better at it. I'm more relaxed at it. A couple of years later, she goes, I've got so relaxed at it, I'm going to come and visit you. And I appear to have 360 ocular vision. And I go,
that's
good
exactly
heavens.
What people say, yes.
Yeah.
And that's what Kenneth Ring was saying, that, he would speak to patients on an operating table that had left their body, and they were able to tell him that you need to clean up that actual operating room because you've got a lot of dust in the mirror overhanging the bed, which is something they wouldn't be aware of unless they'd actually been up there. And I can remember one night, and she said this genuinely, she had never read anything on the experience, watched anything.
She didn't even know what to call it.
Yeah, and she wasn't interested in doing that. She came to my place and told me every single thing I had on my mantle that I'd just put up hours beforehand.
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, we have these etheric or subtle bodies. There's many names for them, so but it's the same thing. It's in us, and some people can leave the physical body and play around in the first level of the higher vibration. It's not the death level yet, but it's the earthly level, so they can still perceive and in some cases interact with. I have a thing in the book you may have seen where the sort of godfather of modern out-of-body experiences, Robert Monroe, although it's been going on for thousands of years, but he kind of popularized it in the mainstream and with his 1971 book, or 72, Journeys Out of the Body. And he went to a friend's house and he pinched her. He tried to talk to her, just like dead people say they try to talk, and she wasn't aware enough, and so he pinched her on the side. She went, but she didn't see him. And then he went back to his body. And then a couple of days later, he talked to her and said, did you see me? And she said, no, I was there at your house. I saw that these two young ladies were talking and they were drinking tea or whatever. And you were there. And she said, yeah, those two girls were here, but I didn't see you. And she said, did you feel anything on your side, perhaps? And she said, that was you? And she lifted up their shirt on the side and there was a bruise there. So you can interact with the physical world, the traditionally physical world, because I think it's all physical on different levels. Yeah. So he was able to do that, and people can train themselves to do that. There's a place called the Monroe Institute in Virginia, here in the States, that I'd love to go to, and they train you to leave your body.
Wow. Now there's...
And as soon as people do that, they suddenly lose their fear of death. Most of them, almost everybody, loses their fear of death because it becomes self-evident that this is the body that I will have, at least in the initial stages after I die, and then it will go on its own, series of meandering steps.
Yeah, onto the next leg of the journey. That's the thing too. Is a lot of people who have had near-death experiences, when they come back, they are no longer afraid of death.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because it's like, okay, yeah.
And that's one of the most comforting things about your book. And as I said, we've worked in many hospices and nursing homes. We've been there at the time of death with many individuals.
I tell them, go towards the light. It's all right.
Yeah. And I think your book will bring a lot of comfort as that book gets out there to a wider and wider audience. There's an extraordinary sort of contemporary science moment that you postulate in that book that may be a way that this energy, this emotional energy is manifesting. Chris, do you want to tell us a little bit about that before we play the trailer, or should we do it after?
I have no idea what you're referring to. You have to give me more. No, you have to give me another hint.
Well, it's dark matter. And, the thing that scientists will tell us now is that there is as much dark matter around us as there is physical matter.
Well, there's more. Dark matter pervades. I mean, there's around. Most people will have heard of dark matter. I'm sorry I didn't catch on to that. I forgot about the entire universe for a moment. Yes.
It's okay.
Yeah. It was, it slipped my mind. In the 1900s, several scientists realized that galaxies spin at a certain rate, that if the matter that we can see were the only matter involved, they would disperse, but they stay in a tight spiral. And the only way that you can justify that, or that you can comprehend that gravitationally, is if there's some unseen matter in a halo. They call it a halo around each galaxy that organizes it and keeps it coherent. So increasingly, it was accepted by physicists, astrophysicists throughout the field, that this must be some sort of other matter that we don't yet understand, an invisible matter. And it's called dark just because it means invisible. It doesn't mean anything but that our light, we can't see it with our light. So it's sort of it's immaterial to call it dark or light. It's just not there in our filter, in our lens, through our lens that we can.
Yeah.
So it's there, and people are spending, including in southern Australia, people are putting detectors, billion-dollar detectors, deep kilometers down underground, so that they can screen out as much of the background cosmic rays and neutrinos and such as possible, and try to detect particles of this new kind of matter, this unknown matter, but it must be there. It's inferred. It's gravitationally inferred. And so in my book, I go into the possibility that this is spirit matter, and that it would make sense that if souls, and if the world that they go into after physical death is a different kind, a different level of material world, because that's what they report. Those who come, whose message is loud and clear through mediums, including direct voice mediums like Leslie Flint in England, for whom for 60 years the dead spoke in the air 3 or 4 feet away from his head, just spoke through a voice box that they constructed with their own sort of material, which sounds wild, but you should look into it. On YouTube, there's the Leslie Flint Trust.
Okay.
Trust me, those of you listening who are interested in this topic, go to that on YouTube. There's fewer than 3,000 subscribers, and it's a crime. It's an absolute cosmic crime that this doesn't have millions of subscribers to it. But anyway, they have hundreds of seances, just audio, because it takes place in pitch dark. And you can hear all these folks testifying to what it's like when they die. And so they have a physical existence up there. Things to them seem solid. They have tables, they have houses, they have roads and buildings, and et cetera, et cetera. They feel that they have a physical body. It's just a different level of matter. So anyway, what this kind of matter would have to be, certain criteria are fulfilled by dark matter, but none of us can say that dark matter therefore is the spirit matter. But it would have to be something like dark matter. That's all we can say at this point, because it has to be invisible to us. But if it mixes with our familiar matter, then it can start to become a hybrid matter and become partly visible, more and more visible, more dense, more solid looking. And sometimes you can touch it, like that, like Robert Monroe, disembodied, pinched his friend, and yet it must also contain all information somehow. One of the themes of the book is, as some information scientists say information is physical. It's not just some abstraction. It's not nothingness. It has to be in some physical medium, And so the idea would be that dark matter, or whatever is the spirit matter, it will contain, like the Akashic records, all information. I mean, all. You can say, I saw somebody on YouTube the other day who is a reader of the Akashic records, that her friends will ask her, can you just hop onto the Akashic record and tell me where I lost my wallet? And she can do that.
Wow.
And you can read the future of a civilization, So the spectrum is entire between the minute and the overwhelming, the overarching truths of the universe. And so it's just a remarkable kind of thing. And so dark matter may be the medium of this, or the aspect of dark matter that we are able to infer from its gravitational effect upon ordinary matter may be just the front-facing, the forward-looking face of the deeper kind of matter, the other kind of matter. It might, you know what I'm saying? It might be just a representation, like the first level of a multi-leveled sort of program that exists out there.
And that's what quantum physics postulates with string theory.
Yeah.
So
I don't tend to understand string theory, and I didn't have much on quantum physics in my book, and I think that I know that Carter, whom you interviewed, gets a lot of mileage out of quantum physics. For me, it doesn't work.
I think you might be thinking of Ron Moorhead from the Sierra Sounds.
Well, he does too, but he does too. He has his book, Quantum Bigfoot. I thought Carter, maybe I'm wrong, but in any case, the quantum explanation doesn't work as well for me as for others, because as far as I understand it, it applies to the subatomic and the atomic level, not to the macro level. So to me, the more promising avenue is to think about spirit, and spirit doesn't seem to need quantum. It has its own form of matter, and it's just as macro as we are, if not more macro. So when a spirit comes back to Earth and communicates with us, it doesn't do it because of quantum entanglement, I don't think. Rather, it's the fact that the soul is a real essence, is a real thing, and it can travel, and it can come into proximity, and then it can fade back into its own realm.
Well, you could even say dimension. So there's this dimension, that dimension, so different dimensions, and it can go in and out of these dimensions.
Well, at a certain point, it's a semantic argument. But what I argue in the book is that the idea of different dimensions has a potential conceptual / emotional downside, which is that it makes us feel separate. When I think that we're all in the same world, we're all in the same place.
Well, I think there's quite a few leading cosmologists now that are postulating that it is not a material universe, but it is a mental universe. Ooh. And again, when you get into neuroscience, they have an extraordinarily huge problem there with where the mind exists. And I know what it's like to actually look up on YouTube at profound thinkers who are bridging that gap and see so few subscribers. And I don't know if we take solace from this, but think of Buckminster Fuller, the man that gave us the geodesic dome. And in his 20s, he realized it was the structure of semantics that was holding back his thinking. And because of his gracious and generous wife, he decided to rewrite the way that he formulated sentences in his mind. And that expanded his consciousness to come up with these extraordinary concepts. And yet, in the latter years of his life, he could only get appearances on regional cable TV stations. Such a profound thinker.
Yeah.
You know what that makes me think of? Because I didn't know that about him, but do you know that Whitley Strieber, who wrote one of the most consequential books of all time, in Communion, and of which a movie starring Christopher Walken was made, he now, the last few of his books, he's had to self-publish. because he's radioactive in the publishing world because everybody thinks he's a kook.
Yeah.
He and Anne lost their beloved house
cabin
because of financial difficulties.
Did you see that documentary?
Which one is it? I heard an interview with him on New Thinking Aloud. Do you know that station?
Yes.
He was interviewed by Jeffrey Mishlove. Well, that's another one that I want to recommend to you and to our listeners is New Thinking Aloud, and aloud is spelled not like you think. ALLOWED.
Okay.
And it's hosted. It's
permitted.
It's permitted, exactly.
Yes.
And it's hosted by a longtime parapsychologist named Jeffrey Mishlove.
That is
okay. We'll
you know,
but there was that documentary that was made very recently, and he's talking about having lost his wife.
Yeah.
And that
lost the cabin,
and that, and it actually, he was saying that when he was seeing the aliens, the entities, he was also seeing dead relatives.
Yes, we stated that before.
Yeah. So
he talked about that on this interview too, and I'm reading his book. I'm reading his book right now called Afterlife Revolution.
Yeah, so I'll find the name of that documentary.
Okay.
And send it to you. You should be able to find it. We watched it on
Travel Channel.
On the Travel Channel. It was on the channel. It was fascinating documentary.
He's an amazing guy, and it just like with Buckminster Fuller, it's sort of consoling that these great minds are we're all in the same. We're paddling around in the same disrespected, undervalued little pond.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact we're trying to navigate a great ocean.
And I think you're doing extremely well, because I think it takes extraordinary courage. You're all self-financed. It's like you're at the cutting edge of science. You're ethnographic documenters, and no one's blinking an eye, and the world should wake up and listen. But as far as I'm concerned, it's the David and Goliath story, and I'm very happy that level of cutting edge science on consciousness and what is around us is there in the hands of the proletariat. If it wasn't, I doubt I'd be able to do this podcast of someone of your stature.
Well, go ahead.
One of the things that kicked into my consciousness that's a bit of a sideline that I've always realized with the narratives, people that we've investigated in the field and that we've read about other people who've investigated, there's this thing when it comes to abduction experiences called doorway amnesia. And that is they have a tendency to forget when they're going into the craft. Prior to that, maybe utilizing the etheric body while things have already occurred that no one seems to be able to logically consume in this culture of ours, and that is that they've floated out of their bed and gone through a solid wall or window, and now they're flying up in the sky towards this entrance. The rare moments where those individuals are hypnotized by a credible hypnotherapist, you find that there is this moment that they contemplate could be death when they're approaching the doorway. And then all of a sudden, that screaming fear dissipates to laughter and happiness as they realize there is no such thing as death, that it is an eternity, and that's not what was happening to them. An elevation was occurring to them.
Yes, joy and love is what they find.
Yeah,
joy and love.
How many people in near-death experiences, this is a bit Ballardian here with Crash, but how many people actually want to go back to the site of their car accident or their incident because for the first time in their life, they have never felt love in that degree? Now, as a parent, you'd realize that the profound moment when your daughter is born is beyond what you could ever imagine love could feel. But the near-death experiences will tell you, take me back to the scene of that accident and let me relive it, because I need to feel that strength of emotion I've never felt at any other time.
Yeah.
I don't remember that exactly. I just remember that most people who have near-death experiences wish to stay dead, but then but then they're told that they have more work to do. That's a common one. Or very rarely they think about their children and they say, no, I need to go back for them. But they are so much happier. And the thing is that, and you know this, is that people, two of the main themes are that people feel as though they've come home.
Yeah.
This is the real life. They suddenly remember, oh yeah, this is who I am. Mm-hmm. I was somehow the wool gets pulled over your eyes and you think that your little earthly character is your real self, but it's not. Your soul is much bigger than that, than this little thing here. And they realize that this is home, and they also realize nothing feels as real as this. Life is but a dream, and that's a cliche, but that's how they suddenly the scales fall from their eyes, and they recognize that life is just it's either a dream or a play or some theatrical performance or a school. It's like just a schoolhouse, or as this famous medium D.D. Home used to say, Hume. It's pronounced Hume, even though it's spelled home. This famous medium I talk about in the book a lot. He said that life on Earth is a flash visit.
Right.
Which I like. I like that a lot. But
I think the older you get, the more you realize that sort of comes to you like every second is so precious.
Absolutely.
Should we have a look at the trailer for There Is No Veil? Humanity, you need to wake up and pay attention. This might be one of the most important books you will ever have in your life, and it will change your life for the better.
If I had any money, if I hadn't taken a vow of poverty through this kind of research, I would hire you as my personal
Don't worry, I'm happy to do that free of charge because we're still renting. We've taken a vow of poverty too, and so we're all in the same boat. Yeah, the chastity is just wearing down over the years. All right, let's have a look at this. And you know what I love about Chris too is that you can watch these trailers. You get so much information, rich material, but it's also transcends you into a much calmer, peaceful place. There's something about this man as a documentarian that, excites me to no end.
Calm down.
Yeah, you need to take a chill pill, my friend.
Never.
Here we go.
Never.
All right, let's have a look at this trailer.
Some Sasquatch researchers continue to stubbornly reject or ignore reports of paranormal abilities displayed by the species. Thankfully, the sheer repetitive consistency of such eyewitness data over decades and decades has forced many others to consider that Sasquatch actually can somehow radically manipulate their physical reality. Among those who accept this testimony or who have experienced such anomalies themselves, the majority interpretation is that these wild ancient people, as part of their remarkable package of stealth behavior, are able to cloak themselves at will to make their bodies partially or fully invisible. I myself hold a minority view. I doubt that any enormous multi-hundred-pound flesh and blood creature can literally vanish before our eyes. For example, if ever there was a situation in which doing so would have come in especially handy, it was on that October afternoon that the Patterson-Gimlin film was captured.
There are some trees or vegetation that was getting between Roger and the creature, and he wanted to get a better and closer, so he relocated. Then the creature just kept right on walking.
The subject persists in view for one long minute in broad daylight. So my point is, what if the truth is the other way around? What if, instead of living Sasquatch dematerializing into thin air, what is happening is that the spirits of those who have passed away are making their presence known by partially or fully rematerializing? After all, members of our own species can do the very same, as the human race has been recording since the birth of writing in ancient Babylon 5,000 years ago. Among those who have encountered active, playful, yet disembodied Sasquatch is Mike Patterson of the Sasquatch Ontario channel.
They were fresh, very fresh. Some of them have been literally seconds old, like this print here. This wasn't this wasn't there seconds earlier. I had just swept the area with my flashlight, checking thoroughly, and then suddenly I look again, and there's an 18-inch adult print, and as standing beside the car with Dwayne, suddenly, he's sweeping too with his flashlight, and he says, "Don't step back," and there's a younger individual's print directly behind me that had just appeared. So we know they're right there, right then, with us.
And here is a brief incident from longtime Sasquatch researcher Jeff Friend.
Look at that. Look at that. Look at this. Look at this, guys. Ain't nobody been over there. Look. That's what I'm saying. Nobody's over there. There ain't nobody over there, yo. Guys, are you seeing this? There's nobody over there. No wind at all. There's no other tree moving. This is the phenomenon I was talking about. Let's go back to camp. Let's go. Guys, are you seeing this?
In my new book, There Is No Veil, I place such capabilities in the context of the long, rich history of psychical, spiritual research, stretching back centuries. A host of eminent scientists, including Nobel Prize winners and other impeccably credentialed women and men, have rigorously demonstrated and documented that the Homo sapiens dead can, under favorable conditions, manifest themselves before we the living. Historically, and still today, authentic seances have seen a wide range of mind-boggling phenomena that, it turns out, are also reported now in association with Sasquatch. One such is the sudden appearance of objects, apparently out of nowhere, objects known as apports, a French word meaning to bring. Those participating in the famous Squirrel Experiment of the 1990s received dozens of apports.
Whilst we were sitting here, this object would arrive, just materialise, and arrive on the table. But as it arrived, that's the sort of noise it would make.
Despite the fact that witnesses heard a loud bang every time an apport arrived, no matter how small, skeptics have dismissed this phenomenon as objects merely thrown into the air. But the appearance of these apports are not so easy to explain away. These newspapers arrived in pristine condition, despite having originated in the 1940s.
And here, being interviewed by Mike Patterson, filmmaker Christopher Munch, whose movie Letters from the Big Man remains the only serious Sasquatch drama, finds himself in the same privileged position.
Was much more easily washed away. The oil remained, and as a result of that, the dirt mixed with it.
And Chris just got a marble, right?
Red marble.
Right now.
This one was literally from the sky.
This just happened right now. They're here. Thank you, my friends.
Common occurrence around here.
I love it.
There are a bunch of others in the book, but one more parallel for now, and that is electricity. It's commonplace for researchers in the field to find their batteries suddenly drained, their equipment disrupted, their EMF meters spiking in close proximity to Sasquatch seen or heard. People also experience being, quote, zapped, a sudden charge hitting them, causing sensations of static electricity on skin and hair, disorientation, dizziness, anxiety, dread, nausea, distorted vision, etc. Similar electric phenomena famously occur as well in the company of ghosts, lights flickering, hair and skin reacting, machines malfunctioning, batteries drained. Also, apparently closely related, orbs are seen, both indoors and out in the forest. A century and a half ago, and also today, orbs and flashing lights appear in deliberate spirit contact settings. So the hypothesis I'm putting out there is that the Sasquatch people are simply able to more readily manifest themselves after death than we are, to share time and space with their still living kin and companions, and occasionally with us too. It's just more natural for them. I think that most, if not all, of the high strangeness attributed to the species is due to this one primary characteristic.
Back to the big guy. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wow, man, that is unreal. I asked for this. Tonight. I asked for this tonight. That is the biggest print we've seen. 20 inches. Wow. Just one. One from the big guy. And then Nefertiti is right behind it.
Well, there you go. There is no veil. You need to run out and get that book immediately available on Amazon.
The audience is struck dumb by that video.
We were too, and it's just, it's an extraordinary thing. I mean, from the notion of the orbs there, that was amazing orb footage. And it's sort of all of a sudden there's something deep inside of you where it makes complete sense. I mean, the whole notion of some of these prints being 1 or 2 feet and then just disappearing to nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the book, I have I found a blog of a psychic, and she does psychic readings in a certain part of her house. And one night, you may have seen this. She finds after her client leaves, she sees that there are little footprints in the snow leading up to the window where she was talking to the client and bringing back the client's loved one from the dead. There's little footprints, and the snow was, I think, 8 inches deep or something, but the footprints only went this deep.
Yeah, right.
They're little.
Yeah.
As though the ghost was partly materialized just enough to leave these prints in the snow, just like with Mike Patterson. By the way, you should all, if you don't know, down under there, you should look for Mike Patterson, who's in North America, in Ontario, in Canada, and his channel is called Sasquatch Ontario. So please look him up, and he has a wealth of cutting edge information that has caused him to be the butt of jokes and ridicule, but he has a thick skin, and he's been doing it for 10 years. And the more I learned about our species' spiritual reality, the more what he has put forward made sense and didn't seem outlandish anymore. In fact, it seemed quite conventional within spirit reality.
Yeah.
And people should be aware too, if they're not, of your extraordinary channel up on YouTube, Impossible Visits. And one thing that always fascinated me early in the piece in going to that channel was your relationship with the parallel hominid and electrical power lines and electrical. We have found that consistently throughout our research. Even the spectral research, the heightened activity will occur with the junction box or the actual power grid as itself. Sightings in this country, we know up in Katoomba, occur around the power stations with much more frequency. But one of the other things we did was we were conducting here for a couple of years the Philip experiment, which you'd be aware of. And we actually had a film crew come from National Geographic that were going, oh, this is going to be a lot of hogwash. And my wife here seems to be very active when you put her up on the table. She doesn't like to use the Ouija board.
No.
She is Greek in origin, and it's like we can't get things into the house. But she was conjuring God knows what during the Philip experiment. And that night, that table started to oscillate on one leg in front of the film crew. And what happened was all their batteries were drained.
Everything drained.
All their lighting rig died instantaneously.
You're kidding me. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Actually, we should try and find that
piece
piece
of
of footage.
I've
got that.
I was certainly like, did you get the footage, or did the batteries drain?
No, the footage. We got footage of it occurring, and then the batteries drained.
Because somebody else was filming as well. Their batteries didn't drain.
They were behind. They were further away. Of course, what we had was the National Geographic crew being highly skeptical. They were down on the floor right next to the table. They lost all power.
Yeah, so somebody else. So I think the lights went out.
So are you a physical medium?
No. No,
well,
I'm an extra large, actually. I'm an extra large.
No.
Oh,
no, I'm not. I'm not.
Asper, Chris.
The joke that was out there had to be made.
Sorry, I know.
How did you do that levitation?
I don't know.
Was it just a one-time thing for you?
Oh, we used to do it. We used to do the Philip experiment. We did it there for quite a few months. Once a week, a group of us would get together and we would do it.
Well, most of our listeners probably don't know what's meant by a Philip experiment.
Well, yeah. Well, if you put into YouTube Philip experiment, it will give you. You can find the information.
It seemed to cross over like what you do with a spirit board, with an Ouija board, and the notion of the skull experiment and all of those.
Yeah.
But what it was basically is that you create a fictional identity.
Yes.
And you try and conjure that identity up. And there was some really good test results from the Philip experiment in the 70s.
I heard about this experiment, and a lot of debunkers used it to, a certain kind of debunker used it to show that all of these phenomena are an outgrowth of the power of our own mind, our own psychokinetic power.
Well, instead
of proof of survival of death.
Yeah,
but I always say, well, a spirit, like, you don't know whether a spirit is not kind of latching on to this fictional character and playing along.
Mm.
So it doesn't prove one way or another whether there's survival of death.
But isn't that in itself that we have this power?
I know. Even if it were just
amazing as well.
Did you get
that's
a chance?
Just crazy.
I talk in the book about this guy in Argentina who can partially levitate a table, and this is the only case that I know of in which there's a responsible scientific control being done with lots of observers and lots of cameras, and there's no way that this could be faked. And I want to put out the Kindle version because then I can put live links on all these videos and people can just click and watch.
Sure, go and watch.
I am sure we have that footage in our archive. And the other thing is, I don't know if you know of the Australian site, and it has a huge American presence and subscribership, Mysterious Universe, and they do some beautiful explorations on all sorts of anomalous activity. They have world-leading researchers write blogs for them. They actually came that night highly skeptical themselves. And after over a decade of research, they said it was the first time they had witnessed an anomalous event.
You're kidding.
No.
Well, that must have made you feel pretty good.
Well, you know what the funny thing is, it's a bit like I don't know if you know the TV series by Patrick McGowan of The Prisoner, and he's taken.
That's from our childhood.
Yeah.
But he is taken away and given a number, and he, on this, after leaving the Secret Service, they've actually cloistered him away in an island. He's given the number 6. He's always addressing number 2, but he has to address number 1.
Yeah.
And there is a profound ending to that series where they finally say, well, you've broken us, and you may be the greatest individual to ever live. Now we're going to give you a chance to oratate, to stand up and talk. And as he stands up to talk, he is drowned out by everyone around him.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of those ironic moments.
That's like a Twilight Zone episode. Is The Prisoner the one where that giant bladder ball keeps chasing him?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That was originally
But here it is. He's just been given all these accolades. He's been told he's the greatest thinker. He's amazing, blah, 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 blah. Now get up and talk. And as soon as he opens his mouth, everybody's just this cacophony of
it's
sound.
It's like a Tower of Babel or something. Well, that's an allegory for our time too, isn't it?
Yeah, nobody's paying attention to him. So what's it all in aid of?
Well, you know what it's like too? It's like looking back on that historic parapsychological research, and a lot of it coming out of Britain at that time.
Yeah.
And spectral research at the turn of the century, great names attached to it. After Conan Doyle, huge amount of people. And now that is dismissed as gobbledygook.
Well, here it is. It's like if you actually went back and collated all that information,
which
all
Chris
those
has
studies,
really done in this book.
Well, a lot of books do it, but people forget about them, and they just
don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, so what? So what? It's like, it's been proven, it's been peer reviewed, it's been, it's been done over and over again. There is something to it, yet the powers that be keep telling us there is nothing to it. It's, these people have got flights of fancy and blah, 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 blah. So it's like, how do you fight against that?
Anything that you do that steps over, that colors outside the lines in this kind of fashion is going to attract like flies to shit.
Yeah, exactly.
All of these detractors who just will, you'll pardon my French.
Yes, totally.
Detractors who will just parrot the same sorts of dismissal language, these talking points of dismissal that only reveal the fact that they haven't spent more than 45 seconds looking into the actual substance of the evidence.
Yeah.
The same with Sasquatch or Yowie detractors. They'll just say these things like there's no solid evidence, and then you'll say any number of things. You'll say, well, why are there tracks that are found from British Columbia to Sydney, Australia, that have the same anatomical morphology to them? Is this a conspiracy with tens of thousands of people leaving these tracks? And they don't have anything to say. They say, well, I just think that that you can't take. Did you see the creature making the tracks?
Yeah. I mean, we've got no way of battling that thing. But one thing we should realize, we recently watched an amazing documentary on William Friedkin, the director of The Exorcist. And although I don't agree with his methodology, the one thing he spoke about is that we're all isolated and alone, trapped in our perception. And that perception is a construct from nature and nurture, and is not a tool to navigate the reality we're in whatsoever. So I think that, like this, it's the meme. Every time I close the cover on a powerful book, I worry that knowledge is being neglected. Because the moment I open the cover of that book up, a whole new world comes to me and expands my consciousness. And, we have a library of literally 10,000 hard copy books in this warehouse. We're going to go up like the end of Zabriskie Point because the humidity is out of control here. But I have a great sadness and melancholy when I close the cover on books, because I think that knowledge needs to be out there. Do you imagine what Buckminster Fuller felt like stepping onto a regional public TV show with, that man could have changed the nature of reality. He was trying to build cars with the least moving parts and the most efficiency, incredible economic homes for people. And what we've left and discarded, all that profound knowledge behind.
Well, when those of us who feel as though we have a legitimate leg up on truth, like us three and some of our listeners, we massage our own egos by saying, well, we're just ahead of our time. But when you find yourself saying that or thinking that, the next thought is, I am hopelessly egocentric. How can I possibly say? But it could very well be the case that we're ahead of our time, and we'll never. But we will know it. I used to say we'll never know it, but now that I know that we can keep track of what goes on Earth after we die, we will
keep an eye on it.
We will.
And the other thing is, Chris, all of us, and you're such an open-minded individual, know that you're not ahead of your time, that you're actually taking into consideration knowledge that has already been accumulated hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. And that I'm
behind the times. Oh no.
You're behind, you're ahead, and the times don't really matter.
You're in the present there is all no at time. Once.
That's right. There is no time.
Yeah, that's right.
So people can buy that off Amazon right now, can't they?
Yes, I have a new cover. You got the first cover. I decided I wanted another cover, so I used AI image generator.
Wow.
Okay.
And after about 150 tries, have you played around with that?
No, but I've read people are having all sorts of moments with that at the moment.
It's fun. The text stuff with the Chat GPT, I haven't played with, but the image generator is a lot of fun. It's really creative. And
I believe that Chat GPT they're having some big moments of actually maybe retracting it because it's starting to answer back and get sort of a fragmented, obscene life of its own.
Oh, wow.
So recently that's started to get really wild.
It's becoming annoyed.
Yeah. Anyway.
There's much sadness.
Artificial annoyance is the AI.
Yeah. Did we show the people the hands, because there's that?
Oh,
I think that's
maybe
that's an
tell
amazing,
us about this.
What was his name?
Did we show that shorter trailer in our last episode? Or did
I think I put it in one of our episodes we're doing. I put it up there. So maybe tell us about these paraffin hands.
Yeah, we've got those. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah, well, in 1921, this Nobel Prize winning physician, Charles Richet, Frenchman, worked with a Polish physical medium named Franek Kluski. And Kluski was able to call forth manifestations by the dead, and people could feel hands. This is quite common. Leslie Kane, I guess it's pronounced Kane, even though it's spelled Keen. Leslie Kane felt the hands on her when she was at Stuart Alexander's seances, and he's still alive in England. He's 82 years old, and he still does physical seances. Anyway, back in 1921, Charles Richet went to this physical medium, which is to be distinguished from a mental medium who simply gets messages. Physical mediums can actually facilitate physical phenomena in their seance rooms, and these hands would constantly be touching people and patting them on the head and holding. People could hold the hands, and sometimes you try to not let go, and it just dissolves in your hand.
Right.
So he asked these entities whether they would please immerse their hands in this liquid paraffin that they had in a pot in the seance room. And everybody, it was dark, but everybody could hear the splashing of the hands going in, and then the hands would come out. The paraffin would cool, and there was no way that a physical, like our kind of physical, familiar physical hand could withdraw itself from the paraffin because the wrist is too narrow, and the paraffin is very thin. So the only way that you would come out with a paraffin glove would be to dematerialize the hand within the paraffin, and then it would cool and harden. And later, people carefully, the team of scientists, investigators, carefully pour plaster of Paris into these molds, into these gloves, and then once it hardened, they would take away the plaster, of course, and they were left with these hard molds, which are known as like these primal artifacts. Finally, an enduring, undeniable.
There was quite a few of them.
Testament. Yeah, there's a lot of them, and they're still on display in the collection of this French museum. And you might say, well, how do you know it was actually, the ghost hands? Besides the fact that they couldn't withdraw because it was thin paraffin on the wrist, you could never withdraw it. Also, they're about 2/3 of the size of adult hands, because the idea in these physical medium situations is that the energy needed to manifest from the spirit realm is contributed by not only the medium, but by the sort of intention and strength of will and belief and attitude of optimism and the high vibration of excitement of the group itself. And so often the spirits who manifest, sometimes in full body, sometimes just a face, sometimes just an arm that fades away up here, but you can see the whole arm. The whole body doesn't have enough energy to come back.
Right.
And so in this case, the hands were in every respect adult morphology, adult shape and anatomy, but not the size of adult hands, and they weren't the size of any of the participants in the session where they occurred.
There you go.
So anyway, so these are superior. And there's some physical mediums today, including a guy named Scott Milligan, who's attempting to get a fingerprint from a from a visiting hand, and so that this fingerprint can be matched up to the living fingerprint of the person who claims to be coming back from the dead.
Right.
It's all very fascinating.
No, it is
fascinating.
I love it.
Yeah. I mean, Paul Davids, when we was at our great famous monsters, Forry Ackerman, I don't know if you know about that. They were very close. And when Forry was, even though being a lover and a historian of all things science fiction in film, he was an arch skeptic. And he actually started to notice that Forry was sending him messages from the other side when he was typing. And the ink would spill on certain words that Forry and him loved. And so he set up a photon collector and was able to have a conversation with Forrest Ackerman through the light coming in the photon collector.
How about that?
Yeah. So I think that, look, it's time to be expansive.
Yeah.
And, let's get some kindness happening. There's much sadness occurring, especially in your country at the moment and so many other countries throughout the world. We need to, we were talking to Carter about just a shock we had watching Jeff Meldrum the other night, looking at the chat room. And the nastiness thrown up in that chat room was just like, we could not believe it. So I think people need to actually pull back from themselves a little bit. And if you're not interested in this subject matter or you feel it threatens your perception of the phenomena, don't watch it.
Yeah, don't go there.
Well, there's always human nature. Human nature prescribes that there's always going to be a spectrum of types of people and types of motivations and inclinations and emotional flavors, but there's a great deal more toxicity in the veins of our country right now than there has been in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do about it.
I think the edges have become sharpened. We're feeling it here as well.
Yeah.
I think it's a universal thing when people have to actually, in Western culture, I think the pandemic pushed us to that level of considering our mortality. And it's something that we seem to avoid in an impulsive culture, a reward-filled culture. And we know that lots of indigenous cultures, that mortality is there in front of your face 24/7, and it becomes something to accept. And people get very threatened with the notion, and that's where your book could alleviate so much fear. And I think your book is an astounding scientific investigation of what's there been in there in history and what's there now. But it also brings incredible comfort and relief because all of us, no matter who we are, search for meaning. Why are we here? What is this existence about? Why are we so short-lived? Is there anything after it? And I think some of the questions have been answered in There Is No Veil.
Well, there's a lot of people who are Christians or Muslims or those who stake their vision of reality upon religious dogma will not find themselves resonating with spiritualism, or, I guess I'm a latecomer to this in the tradition of spiritualism. And because spiritualism, people who die and report back say, well, it turns out, there's no judgment. You're not damned.
Yeah.
There's nothing but love. And what you've done in this life that needs to be addressed and that needs contrition and needs to be evolved beyond is what is up to you. It's your responsibility. There's some people who are facing death are going to be comforted by a Christian viewpoint, not by this viewpoint.
Yeah.
That's just a throwaway thought,
But there's some Christians out there, and I know Paul Wallace, who we're interviewing soon down here, who people have heralded as the new Eric von Daniken. He's got more than enough room to accommodate that way of perceiving things, and it sits in still fine with his acknowledgement of,
God.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's all in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, it is.
But when it appears in your lounge room to materialize and dematerialize people, it goes a little bit beyond that.
A little bit further.
It does.
Yeah, it does. We cannot thank you enough for your time and your
You
generosity.
two have had a marathon day, haven't you? Two long interviews.
You wouldn't believe what we're going into tonight with our grandchildren. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
Now, I thought Monday was the grandchildren day.
No,
they're coming over on the weekend.
Yeah.
We're hosting World Pride down in Sydney, Australia, so that's all starting. So,
and we have a 15-year-old.
We've got a 15-year-old grandson who's a drag queen.
World professional drag queen.
There you
go. He's always been
more
attracted
power to him or
Absolutely.
them. More power to them.
And we will get the haters out now big time for articulating that. But he is very confident. He's always been allowed to be who he is.
Yep.
Scholastically, he's really brilliant. And theatrically, he's picked
amazing.
a lot up from his grandparents. You know, but
I saw that documentary that you shared about you.
All right,
And I know your the trail of vividness that you
of
leave
destruction
left in Sydney. And you should tell the audience about that documentary.
Well,
one day.
We might put up a link to the Vimeo site for it.
I very much appreciated seeing the streak, the blue streak, the electric streak you've left in your wake in Sydney.
Yeah, I'm still kind of leaving it, still doing it.
Yes, what am I saying? In fact, it's only getting brighter.
Exactly.
Doug Heischek had a look at that documentary recently, and he was profoundly affected and is really very, amazed and supportive of your work, and, he was just so excited after that first interview. But Doug saw it and said, I had no idea that you were such an identity in the punk scene, Jamie. And I'm like, experimental music, and it was primarily there because I had all these dysfunctional musicians and it was the easiest way for me to go out with them and actually liberate their souls.
It shows your heart is a mile wide, both of you.
Yeah.
Well, slightly fractured as well.
No, your heart's a mile wide.
But you know what? It is a great community we're building up here with Untold Radio, and the ability to speak to someone like yourself and be inspired, and just thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for your time and your generosity of spirit, Chris, forever.
Yeah.
It's a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure. And this will be part 2 of a 25-part interview series.
That's right. Exactly.
We're never stopping now. Never stopping.
No.
And look, we hope you have a great evening. And one last thing is, you had a suggestion for Chris with that bell and Mum.
Oh, I was just thinking maybe you just need to rig that bell in your room just above your bed and just tie like a long, string and trail it up into a room and just have it so she can just pull it. And ring it over the top of your head.
No, you know what she forced me to do is she forced me just turn on your freaking cell phone. I'll call you when the heart attack comes. I said, God.
Does she have time? We Jamie and I don't have cell phones.
I want to not have cell phone, but
we don't. We've never had one.
Well,
so
good for you. I thought I was the last one who hated cell phones.
We still refuse to have a cell phone.
I'll tell you what, they want to shoot you for that too.
Oh my God. So much trouble.
They do.
Yeah, they make it really hard for you if you
to
don't
live
have a cell
phone.
Without
it.
But
lots of times you sign up for things and they say, "Okay, what's your mobile?"
I say I don't have one.
There's a lot of stuff you can't get to if you don't have that mobile phone, too.
I miss out on a lot of things, but you know what? I don't really care. I don't need all that stuff.
Yeah,
done.
I think you're after my own heart.
The other thing that just came into my mind, I lost my mother due to dementia, but during COVID, and we had a friend of ours who's actually a big, well-known producer for television. I won't mention his name. And he came to an event we were doing when we were DJing, and I'm, being my crazy self there, Chris, and he sat down with my wife, and do you want to quickly just say?
Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about he saw Mum and Dad in the room.
Oh, right, okay. Yes.
It took several stages to remembering that, yes.
So I actually, because I didn't know that this person, I didn't know that this person, could see dead people, basically. Mm-hmm. And he said to me,
we're in a busy
bar,
we were
DJing at the time, and it was really noisy and stuff. And he just sat down and he said, Jamie's mum, has he just lost her? And I said, yeah, he just lost her a few months ago. And he said his dad's here as well. And he just wants me to tell him that they're watching over him and that they're fine and stuff. And I was like,
and they're okay for the very first time in their life with my craziness.
With his craziness. So
you're kidding. You finally got approval.
Got approval from the other realm. So, and and I said to this, I looked at him and I said, and we've known him for like 20 years. And I was like, why did you not tell? He said, I don't like to tell people that. He said, because they look at me funny. They look at me differently. And he said, I will only tell them if I have a message for them, that I think is important that they need to know. And he knows that we're very open to.
Well, he should have told you years ago. You knew you wouldn't judge him amiss.
He said, I had nothing to tell you back then. I had no message for you.
He keeps his own counsel. Wow.
Absolutely. So there you go.
When that documentary, Love and Anarchy, on a screen first, my parents came to see it at a packed cinema here in Glebe at the Valhalla, big repertory cinema, about 500 people. And I was very worried about my father seeing it. He didn't have a great reaction to my performing. And I slowly, I edged my way to the front. And through the entire film, he had his head down and wasn't watching. But the scene that he appeared in, he actually woke up and was totally absorbing, and that was it. Yeah. So it was a great relief, I heard that they appeared there, and they said they wanted to apologize for the way they've reacted.
And they were happy
to the way
because I think unless you are the type of spirit who, as we talked about before, has some darkness in it and has to stay, in a compromised situation, to put it mildly, you're going to automatically expand your perspective once you get into this new condition. And so he was able to see that you had been operating on a broader playing field than he had been.
Yeah.
That's very kind of you to say that.
No, it's true.
In retrospect, when I think back onto my father, he was operating in an extraordinary playing field himself. It was just a different time, a different way of doing it.
Yeah. That's all.
Anyway, look, on behalf of Down South Anomalies,
and the Untold Radio
and our
network.
Erratic way of doing things, again, we have to thank the profound Christopher Noel. Please go up onto Amazon, go up onto YouTube and look at Impossible Visits. If you're going to do anything, give this man some shine. He's working on behalf of all of us to make for a better world. And we just love you.
I have a website also called thenearnessofyou.net.
Okay.
It used to just refer to Sasquatch, but now, now that same title refers more broadly to the nearness of lots of entities.
I'll put that up.
We'll put that all up in the links. Please excuse me for neglecting that. And Chris, we wish you the better part of this evening and take good care. We love you deeply.
And we'll speak soon again.
All right. Thank you, man. And woman. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely.
You've been on Untold Radio, Down South Anomalies, Beyond Sasquatch, Paranormal Activity with the one and only Christopher Noel.
We'll be back next week with more. Bye.